Hi all, hope you are all doing fine. I am Christeena Antony, second year BA English Literature student of K College Mananam. And today I am going to deal with the third module Britannia Rules the Waves of the Text Shapers of Destiny, starting from King James II. Let's move on to the session. After the death of King Charles II, King James II ascended the throne of England. He wasn't a tactful and diplomatic ruler. He was a Roman Catholic. Also, he maintained an army of 15,000 soldiers. He didn't care the Test Act, which was passed in 1673. The major purpose of this act was to exclude the Roman Catholics and dissenting Protestants from government offices except the House of Lords. But instead of it, King James II put the Catholics to major positions. Later, in 1687, he issued the Declaration Indulgence that suspended laws against the Roman Catholics and the dissenters. Due to these actions, Tories, Whigs, Anglican Church, and other people too disagreed the rule of James II. After his rule, Mary, the elder daughter of James II, ascended the throne, and she was a Protestant. William of Orange was her husband, who was also a great Protestant ruler. Both of them ruled the England afterwards. Whigs and Tory leaders signed a document inviting William of Orange to liberate England from the Papists. William prepared for a war, and later in November 1688, the Dutch fleet and William landed in England and marched towards London. Then James II was deserted, and he called the Council of Lords to sign a treaty with William. James had no way, so he left England and took refuge at France. The Parliament crowned William and Mary as the joint rulers of England in January 1689. After the reign of William of Orange and Mary, their daughter Anne took the crown. By this, the Stuart dynasty came to an end. This revolution is known as the Glorious or Bloodless Revolution, as not even a drop of blood was shed, and it entered the absolute monarchy, and the divine right and constitutional monarchy came into being after this. The major purpose of the Glorious or the Bloodless Revolution that took place in England from 1688 to 89 was to overthrow King James II and to establish the rule of his daughter Mary and William in England. This was the time when the Bill of Rights was passed by the first Parliament of King William and Queen Mary's reign. It marked the victory of the Parliament and also the birth of constitutional monarchy. The Bill of Rights mainly limited the sovereign power of the king in four ways. Firstly, the king would have no power to suspend the laws of the lands. Secondly, the king should not levy any money without the consent of the Parliament. Thirdly, the king couldn't be a Roman Catholic or anyone from this religion. And fourthly, the king shouldn't keep a standing army at peace times and shouldn't interfere in the Parliament's working. Thus, the Glorious Revolution also ended the religious intolerance in England at that time. King William of Orange then passed the Toleration Act with the Parliament, which allowed the nonconformists to worship their own way. The Whigs too supported him as they were willing to accept the non-Anglicans. The Scots were allowed to follow the Presbyterian religion, so they too accepted William as the ruler. He also brought England and Scotland's union by the law. The Scottish Parliament was abolished, and they sat at the England's Parliament. But in Ireland, the Catholics were predominant, so they accepted the overthrown James II as their ruler. This difference brought war between Ireland and England, and later in 1690s, the Battle of Boyne took place under the leadership of William of Orange, and Ireland was defeated and James II fled to France. After this, the Treaty of Limerick was signed in 1691. By this treaty, a conflict related to the 1688 to 1697, the 9 Years' War, ended. It was a treaty with two separate agreements. This treaty was signed by William that agreed the Irish Catholics their religious freedom. But later, the treaty was broken and they were cruelly treated. Due to this reason, the gap of Ireland and England widened, and it still prevails. Then Tories again contacted James II, so Parliament feared his coming back, and so they passed the Act of Settlement to pass the crown to Queen Anne, sister of Mary of Orange, and Queen Mary had no children. Queen Anne too had no children, so after her, the Stuart dynasty came to an end, and it was passed on to the Dowager, the Electress of Hanover, who was the granddaughter of James I, and thus a new dynasty known as the Hanoverian dynasty came into being. Now, let's know about the society and literature at the time of Stuarts. England proved to be a strong nation after the victory over the Spanish Armada. James I entered into a treaty with Spain and it entered the hostility. England's main attention was towards the trade and the amassing of great wealth of unknown lands. During this time, nobility had hunger for lands as they had no claim in paternal property, and the Puritans also faced persecution during the reign of the Stuarts. Also, colonization started during Queen Elizabeth's reign, and many companies like Virginia Company of Massachusetts, Bay Company, British East India Company, all were established at this time for trade and commerce, immigrants, and export and import of goods. The English East India Company, which was founded in 1600 for trade from India and the East, was given the freedom to manage its own affairs. It had to employ its own soldiers in order to protect its ships, called the East Indiamen, which were built for trade and war. The Parliament's and King's difference in opinion on religious and political issues was caused by the fact that Parliament refused to pay money while King needed it. So the only way left for the King was to impose tax on the common people. Due to this reason, the common people turned against him. During Stuart's reign, poor law continued like the Elizabethan period. This law took care of poor people's life. They did not need to beg for their livelihood, which made their lives easier. Idle ones were put into the homes of correction, and drunkards were also punished at this time by this law. But unemployment and the rise in the prices made everyone's life difficult. King Charles II was called as the Merry Monarch at this time. Now let's do a quick recap on the hierarchy of the Stuart dynasty of England. The first ruler of the Stuart dynasty was King James I. He ruled England from 1603 to 1625, and after his death, his son Charles I ascended the throne, and he ruled from 1625 to 1649. Remember, it was during the Charles I's reign the long parliament of the Puritan Revolution took place, and also the First and the Second Civil War broke out. After King Charles I, the dictatorship was again re-established by the Oliver Cromwell coming. He became the Protectorate of England. Also remember, he was the first and the last dictator of England. Then came the rule of Charles II, who was the son of King Charles I. Charles II ruled from 1660 to 1685, and this period of his ruling was known as the Restoration period. Many acts like the Corporation Act, the Act of Uniformity, the Quaker Act, Conventicle Act, the 5 Mile Act, all were passed during his reign. Also remember, the Glorious Revolution also took place at this time, and the Second Dutch War also took place during his reign. Also remember, the two parties, the Country Party or the Whigs and the Court Party or the Tories, were formed at the time of the Glorious Revolution during his reign. After Charles II, his brother James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, became the James II, or the next ruler of England. James II ruled from 1685 to 1688. After James II, his daughter Queen Mary and William of Orange, her husband, ruled the England. After their reign, Queen Mary's sister, Queen Anne, became the last ruler of the Stuart dynasty. Later, the ruling was handed over to the Hanoverian dynasty. This was all about the Stuarts hierarchy. Now let's know about the major literary figures at that time. The first one among them is John Milton, who was one of the greatest epic poets of the 17th century. He was a poet who was in love with the magic of words. He had humanist ideals, and he had high idea of the lofty power of poetry. Lycidas is one of his well-known pastoral elegy, which was written as a tribute to his friend King Edward. He was a Puritan, and Areopagitica is a prose written by him to have a free press. He became blind and lost his first wife and son in quick succession, and he spent the rest of his life on writing. Paradise Lost is one another epic of 12 books written by him. It's a well-known epic, and in this epic, he portrays Adam and Eve as pale, significant figures before the image of fallen angel Satan. He portrays Satan as the hero of the poem rather than Adam. Milton's famous drama is Samson Agonistes. Paradise Lost is an epic of 12 books written by him, and Paradise Regained is another such epic written by him. Next major writer at this time was John Bunyan. He was a Puritan writer. He was a tinker by trade, and also he was a preacher. He wrote the famous allegory, The Pilgrim's Progress, when he was in Bedford jail, and this allegory depicts the journey of the Christian from the city of sin to the city of salvation. Next was the time of Jacobean period. This period mainly refers to King James I's reign times. This period includes the plays of Shakespeare and Ben Jonson. Also, this period mainly includes the revenge tragedies. Playwrights at this time includes John Webster and Thomas Middleton. One of the well-known revenge tragedy, the Spanish tragedy, written by Thomas Kidd, was written at this time, and the best of the revenge play, The Duchess of Malfi, was written by Webster during this period. The next major writer was John Donne. He was the founder of the metaphysical school of poetry. The metaphysical school of poetry uses disparate images to convey ideas. These poets were more intellectual than emotional, and Dr. Samuel Johnson remarked them by saying that heterogeneous ideas were yoked together by violence for them. John Donne's famous poems include a valediction forbidding mourning, hymn to God the Father. The prose writers during this period includes Francis Bacon, who was an essayist, and he used wit and epigrammatic style in his essays. Metaphysical poets at this time mainly includes George Herbert and Henry Vaughan. Next was the period of Caroline age in literature. This period refers to the reign of the two Charles kings, King Charles I and King Charles II. The Cavalier poets wrote during this Charles I times. Sir John Suckling and Sir Richard Lovelace were the poets during the Caroline age. Andrew Marvell and John Milton were some other poets at this time. To His Coy Mistress was the notable work of Andrew Marvell. Next was the period of Restoration comedy. Charles II's reign was known as the Restoration period. It was Charles II who reopened the theatres, but it was shut down by the Puritans. The major writers during the Restoration period include Sir George Etheridge and William Wycherley. William Wycherley's famous Restoration comedy was The Country Wife, and William Congreve was one another writer of Restoration comedy. His notable work was The Way of the World. Comedy of manners were also written at this time, which includes the works of Richard Sheridan and Oliver Goldsmith. That's the end of this session. With this, I am concluding my class. Thank you all for watching.